So this is a short story from my story called A Space Odyssey. Now, this is about going to Venus. And in the story, I don't know where I'm going to put it, but this is what happens inside the Space Odyssey universe. So, A Space Odyssey. A Space Odyssey story. Going to Venus. As I was looking up at the rocket that was going to take us all the way to the distant planet, I remembered of how far we have come. In the 1970s, the Soviets landed rovers on Venus using the Venera spacecrafts. Venera 7 was the first one to land on the ground and actually make data and send it back to us. It didn't have a smooth landing, but it was a smooth enough one for it to survive and send us back information that we then learned for Venera 8, 9, and the following ones. And we eventually realized, after getting pictures back and more data, that humans could not set foot on Venus. Or so we thought. Now, more than half a century later, we are setting foot on Venus. We've already set foot on Venus. This is me and my crew's story of going to Venus. I was the captain of 5 people, and we were all going to stay on Venus for 6 months. And so on the way to Venus, I was nervous, not knowing if we will ever make it back. Very likely we will, or else it wouldn't be designed very well, but there wasn't a guarantee. We started orbiting Venus, getting ready to land, knowing we were going to spend the next couple months of our lives there. And we got through the atmosphere, hurtling at over 70 miles per hour. Through the thick atmosphere, the pressure of the cabin was immense. We started feeling a bunch of pain. And then we hit the surface. We felt very similar to the gravity of Earth, only a little bit lighter. We looked out the window to see a yellowish tint and gray rocks all over of a barren wasteland. Hopefully our pressure suits worked. We didn't know if they would or not, but this was a risk we were willing to take. And so we put on our pressure suits and went through the airlock. Immediately, we felt a bunch of pressure on us, but the suits were holding us up very nicely. We were safe, but we were also very warm. And as we looked around, it was a beautiful sight. The first humans to set foot on this planet. This was just as impressive as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon in 1969. This was just as important as the crew of the Mars, that was just as impressive as people landing on Mars in just a few years ago. Locus made it possible. The private space company. Now, we looked around even more and noticed that there was a cave. And we decided to go into the cave to see if we could find anything. It was just barren. So we went back to the spacecraft and started digging through the supplies to create a livable space. After about a week, we got it all set up. And so then we grabbed out the Venus rover and started roaming around Venus. We soon came across the remains of one of the Venera spacecrafts. You could hardly make it out, but it was definitely not of Venus origin. It was pretty much destroyed at that point. We were even surprised that some parts of it were still there. We then took some of the rocks around and brought it back and examined it under a microscope. It had a very similar composition to granite. And crazy enough, life. Although the life wasn't living, we were able to find a fossilized bacteria in the rock. And that meant Venus once had life, just as Mars did. So, what happened to Venus? We don't know. Could have been a volcanic eruption. Speaking of which, after a month, there was a huge volcanic eruption. We almost died. We were luckily fine. But that set us back a lot of time. Soon before we knew it, the 6 months was up. We grabbed all the pieces that we got from Venus, including what seemed like a type of metallic object. We found it in the cave after we explored a little bit more. And then we left the rudimentary living quarters, got in our spaceship, went back up to connect with the remaining part of our spacecraft, and went back home.